After a grueling 12-hour flight from Paris, I landed in the US with a heart full of anticipation. I'd been planning this surprise visit to my mom for weeks, imagining her face lighting up as I walked through the door of my childhood home. In suburban America, with a bag of Parisian chocolates and a silk scarf tucked under my arm, I was ready to wrap her in a hug and relive old memories. But as I stood on the familiar porch, the brass numbers glinting under the afternoon sun, something felt off. The door swung open, and a stranger stared back at me. "I live here," she said flatly, no hint of apology in her voice. My stomach dropped like I'd missed a step on a staircase. "You don't know my mom?" I asked, my voice catching. She shook her head, claiming she'd been there for 7 months. 7 months? I fumbled for my phone and called my mom. "Are you home?" I asked, heart pounding. "Of course, I'm waiting for you," she replied, cheerful and oblivious. That's when the world tilted. If she was home, who was this woman standing in my mother's house? The moment I hung up the phone with my mom, the world felt like it had tilted off its axis. Her voice, so calm and certain, echoed in my head. "Of course I'm home, waiting for you." But I was standing on the porch of my childhood home in suburban Virginia, staring at a stranger who claimed she'd lived there for 7 months. The brass numbers above the door, ones I'd traced with my finger as a kid, mocked me with their familiarity. My mom wasn't here. The woman who opened the door wasn't budging, and her matter-of-fact tone left no room for negotiation. I clutched the bag of Parisian chocolates and the silk scarf I'd brought for Mom, feeling like I'd stepped into someone else's life. My brain scrambled to make sense of it, but the pieces didn't fit. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I pulled out my phone again, my fingers cold despite the warm afternoon sun. "Mom," I said when she picked up, trying to keep my voice steady, "can you give me your address? I just want to make sure I'm heading to the right place." There was a pause, then a chuckle, like she thought I was being overly cautious. "It hasn't changed," she said, rattling off an address I didn't recognize. It wasn't the house I was standing in front of. It was across town, in a part of the city I'd never associated with her. My stomach churned as I repeated the address back to her. "I'll be there soon," I managed, hanging up before my voice could betray the panic creeping in. I glanced back at the house, the stranger's words, "I live here," ringing in my ears like a bad song on repeat. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and I was about to find out what. I called an Uber, too rattled to drive the rental car, parked a few feet away. As the driver pulled onto the highway, I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of my hometown blur past. I'd grown up in this place, spent summers riding my bike down these sidewalks, and helped my mom plant tulips in the front yard. Now, it felt like a stranger's territory. The driver didn't say much, which was fine by me. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. My mind was racing, replaying the stranger's blank expression, the way she'd shrugged like I was the one who'd gotten the address wrong. I tried to picture my mom in a new place, but the image wouldn't form. She loved that house. It was hers, ours, a piece of my dad's memory she'd clung to after he passed. Why would she leave it? As we crossed town, the scenery shifted. The neat lawns and picket fences gave way to cracked sidewalks and faded storefronts. Pawn shops and convenience stores with bars on the windows lined the streets. My heart sank lower with every block. The Uber stopped in front of a gray, weathered apartment building that looked like it had seen better days. The lobby's fluorescent lights flickered, and the chipped tile floor smelled faintly of fried food and something mustier, like old carpet that hadn't been cleaned in years. I took the stairs, each step creaking under my weight, my suitcase bumping against my leg. My mom's apartment was on the 3rd floor, and when I knocked, I wasn't sure what to expect. Would she be standing there, with her usual warm smile, ready to laugh off whatever mix-up this was? Or was something else waiting for me? The door opened, and there she was, my mom, smaller than I remembered, her hair grayer than it had been 2 years ago when I last saw her in person. She wore a faded cardigan, and her eyes lit up when she saw me, but there was a flicker of confusion. You're here," she said, pulling me into a hug. I hugged her back, but my eyes were already scanning the room over her shoulder. It was a 1-bedroom studio, barely bigger than my Paris apartment. A sagging bed was pushed against one wall, a small table with 2 mismatched chairs took up the center, and a hot plate sat on a counter that doubled as a kitchen. This wasn't a home. It was a place to exist. I set my bag down, the chocolates and scarf feeling absurdly out of place. What is this place? I asked before I could stop myself. My voice came out sharper than I meant, and her brow furrowed, like I'd asked something obvious. This is my apartment, she said, tilting her head. Why are you living here? I pressed, my heart pounding. She looked at me like I was missing something. You told me to, she said, her voice quiet but firm. You asked your brother and sister to handle it. You said we needed to rent the house. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, my mouth dry. Mom, I didn't say that. I didn't even know you'd moved. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger but in confusion, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. She crossed the room to the table, picked up her phone, and handed it to me. Look, she said. I opened WhatsApp, and there it was, my face in the profile picture, my name at the top, but the number wasn't mine. The messages were short, formal, nothing like the way I talk. It's better if they handle the rental, one read. Don't worry about the details. It's already arranged. My hands shook as I scrolled through the chat. This wasn't me. Someone had created a fake account using my picture, my name, to convince my mom to leave her home. This isn't me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I never sent these. Mom sank into one of the chairs, her face a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. What do you mean? That's your picture. I shook my head, my mind racing. It's not my account. I've never seen these messages. I asked her who set up the WhatsApp for her, and her answer made my blood run cold. Your brother and sister, she said. Last year, my phone was acting up, so they fixed it. They said this was you. They said you wanted them to take care of everything. I swallowed hard, the pieces starting to click together. And you believed them? I asked, sharper than I meant. She gave me a look that cut deeper than any words could. Why wouldn't I? They were here. They said you'd get upset if we talked about it on the phone, that you'd made up your mind. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I set the phone down, my mind spinning. My brother and sister, my half-siblings, had orchestrated this. They'd used my name to manipulate her, to move her out of her home and into this cramped, run-down apartment. For what? Money? Control? I looked at my mom, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes searching mine for answers I didn't have yet. I never said any of that, I told her, my voice softer now. I wouldn't move you out without talking to you. I wouldn't do this. Her mouth trembled, and she looked down, her voice barely audible. All this time, I thought, you didn't want me in the house anymore. Those words broke something in me. I'd spent years building a life across the ocean, chasing my dreams as a freelancer, thinking I'd left the pain of my childhood behind. But here it was again, dressed up in a new form of fake WhatsApp account, a forged signature, a betrayal that cut deeper because it came from family. I sat across from her, the phone between us like a loaded weapon. We didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear. Someone had lied to my mom, and I wasn't leaving until I figured out who and why. Sitting across from my mom in her cramped studio apartment, the weight of her words, I thought you didn't want me in the house anymore, hung heavy in the air. The fake WhatsApp messages, my face staring back from a profile that wasn't mine, churned up memories I'd spent years trying to bury. This wasn't the first time I'd felt erased in my own life, my reality twisted by someone else's narrative. As I looked at my mom, her hands trembling slightly, I realized I couldn't explain the betrayal unfolding in front of us without digging into the past. The hurt wasn't new. It was a ghost that had followed me from my childhood home in suburban Virginia to the cobblestone streets of Paris. When I was 7, my mom remarried. I remember the wedding day vividly, the sticky sweetness of cake frosting, the itch of my stiff dress, and the adults cooing about how lucky I was to have a new dad. My real dad had died when I was 4, leaving only fragments of memories, his deep laugh, the scent of his aftershave. The new guy, my stepfather, wasn't a monster in the obvious ways. He didn't yell or break things. In public, he was charming, cracking jokes at church picnics, helping neighbors move furniture. But in private, his gaze could turn cold, especially when it landed on me. It was like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve, a leftover piece from a life he didn't choose. I felt it even then, a quiet tension that made me shrink in my own home. The manipulation started small, so subtle. I didn't see it for what it was. Things would go missing, a book, a toy, and somehow, I'd be blamed. She's careless, he'd say to my mom in the kitchen, his voice low but loud enough for me to hear from the next room. A vase broke once while I was upstairs. the crash echoing through the house. By the time I ran down, he was sweeping up the shards, shaking his head. "She's been running around all morning," he told my mom, his tone dripping with concern. I protested, my voice high and desperate. I wasn't even here. But his calm, patronizing smile shut me down. "You probably didn't mean to," he said, and my mom's disappointed glance told me the conversation was over. Those moments piled up, each one chipping away at my place in the family. Then my half-siblings arrived, first my sister when I was 7, then my brother 2. Years later, the house changed overnight. My stepfather's face lit up when he looked at them, his voice softening in a way it never did for me. He'd buy them little gifts, a toy truck, a glittery hair clip, while I got a nod if I was lucky. My mom loved me, I knew that, but her love for them had a different energy, a brightness I couldn't touch. Their milestones were celebrated with parties and proud stories. Mine were expected, barely noticed. When my sister cried at an amusement park, claiming I'd pushed her in line for the log ride, a total lie, my stepfather swooped in, comforting her while shooting me a look that said, "I've got you now." On the drive home, my mom was silent, and I was grounded without a chance to explain. That night, I overheard him in the kitchen, his voice smooth as he told her I was jealous, that my behavior wasn't healthy. I lay in bed, heart pounding, realizing he could rewrite who I was in her eyes. That fear of being redefined, of losing my mom to his version of me, never left. It shaped me, made me hypervigilant, always watching for the next twist. By my teens, I was counting down to freedom. I did well in school, made friends, but inside, I was on edge, braced for the next accusation. When my mom and stepfather divorced in my early 20s, I thought I'd escaped. My siblings stayed close to him, he'd been a good dad to them, after all. But I carried the scars, the sense that I'd never fully belonged in my own family. Moving to France was my fresh start. I threw myself into my work as a freelancer, building a life across the ocean. The distance helped, but it didn't erase the past. I kept in touch with my mom through calls and occasional visits, trying to rebuild what we'd lost. But over the last year, I'd noticed a shift. Her calls grew shorter, her tone distracted. I told myself she was just busy, maybe tired. I didn't realize how far we'd drifted until I stood on that porch, facing a stranger in her place. Now, sitting in her tiny apartment, the fake messages on her phone brought it all rushing back, the manipulation, the isolation, the feeling of being written out of my own story. This wasn't just about a house. It was about trust, about family, about the people who were supposed to have your back but instead used your name to betray you. My mom's eyes met mine, and I saw the same hurt I felt. The realization that someone, likely my siblings, had orchestrated this. I didn't have all the pieces yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't a scared kid anymore. I'd built a life on my own terms, and I wasn't going to let anyone rewrite my story again. As I held my mom's hand, I felt a resolve settle in. We were going to figure this out, and whoever was behind it was about to learn I wasn't backing down. The air in my mom's cramped studio apartment felt thick with betrayal as I stared at the WhatsApp messages on her phone. My face, my name, but not my words. Someone had woven a web of lies, convincing my mom to leave her home, our home, and I had a sinking feeling I knew who. The messages were cold, formal, nothing like the way I'd talked to her. "It's better if they handle the rental. Don't worry about the details." My hands shook as I scrolled through them, each one a brick in a wall built to keep my mom in the dark. She sat across from me, her eyes wide with confusion, and I could see the hurt settling in. "This isn't me," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "I didn't write these." She nodded slowly, but the weight of her misplaced trust hung between us. We needed answers, and we needed them fast. This wasn't just about a house. It was about family, trust, and the kind of deception that cuts deeper than a knife. I asked my mom who'd set up the WhatsApp account, and her answer confirmed my suspicions. "Your brother and sister," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They fixed my phone last year, said it was you." My half-siblings, the same ones who'd grown up basking in my stepfather's favor while I fought to be seen. My stomach twisted, but I wasn't surprised. This felt like a page from an old playbook, one I'd hoped I'd left behind in my childhood home in suburban Virginia. "We need to see a lawyer," I told her, and she agreed, her face set with a determination I hadn't seen in years. We weren't just going to sit here and let this slide. The next morning, we sat in a lawyer's office that smelled of burnt coffee and old paper, the kind of place you'd see in a small-town American strip mall. The lawyer, a middle-aged guy, with a calm, seen-it-all demeanor, slid a photocopy across the desk. It was a lease agreement for my mom's house, and at the bottom was a signature that was supposed to be mine. Except it wasn't. The loops and flourishes were all wrong, like someone had tried to mimic my handwriting after a quick glance. "That's not my signature," I said, my voice sharp. The lawyer nodded, like he'd expected as much. "Good," he said, "because this authorizes the tenant to rent the property." He leaned back, tapping his pen. "The rent payments have been going to an account in your sister's name. That's where we start." My heart pounded. My sister, my brother, they'd forged my signature, faked my messages, and moved my mom out of her home. For what? The lawyer laid it out. We had a case: forgery, fraud, unauthorized use of property. The words sounded heavy, like something out of a courtroom drama, but they gave us leverage. I glanced at my mom, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face a mix of resolve and disbelief. This was her home, the place where she'd raised me, where we'd planted tulips and hung Christmas lights. Someone had taken that from her, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. 2 days later, we stood in my sister's kitchen, the lease copy on the counter between us like a loaded gun. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, her face a mask of indifference. My brother sat at the table, scrolling on his phone, pretending he wasn't part of this. "You want to explain this?" I asked, pointing to the forged signature. My sister glanced at it, then shrugged. "We were managing things for Mom. She didn't need all that space." Her voice was casual, like she was talking about borrowing a sweater. I felt my blood boil. "That's not the question," I said, my tone icy. "Why is my name on here without my permission?" My brother finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "We thought you wouldn't care. You don't even live here anymore." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "So, living in France means I don't get a say in my own house? That's in the Constitution, right?" They didn't laugh. My mom stepped forward, her voice shaking but firm. "You will return the rent money. All of it." My sister's mouth twitched, like she was about to argue, but I cut her off. "Where's the money?" My brother hesitated, just long enough for me to know something worse was coming. "We gave it to Dad," he said. The room went still. My mom's face drained of color. "What?" she whispered. My sister jumped in, her words rushed. "He needed it. His business went under. He's drowning in debt." I couldn't hold back anymore. "So, let me get this straight," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You faked my messages, forged my signature, kicked Mom out of her home, and funneled the rent money to the man who spent my childhood making me feel like an outsider in my own house." Neither of them met my eyes. My mom's voice broke the silence. "You lied to me for months," she said, looking at my sister. "I thought you were protecting me from her." She gestured toward me, her hand trembling. "But you were protecting him." My sister straightened, her chin lifting like she was about to deliver some noble speech. "He's our father. We couldn't let him sink." I shook my head, disbelief turning to fury. "You didn't just save him. You threw Mom overboard to build him a raft." The conversation turned ugly fast. I laid out the evidence: the fake WhatsApp, the forged signature, the bank records showing the rent payments. The lawyer had been clear. We could take this to court, maybe even the police. They had 2 choices: repay every cent or face the consequences. They chose repayment, but not because they were sorry. They didn't have the money anymore. It had gone to my stepfather, so they'd have to pay out of their own pockets, month by month, plus damages. Within a week, the lease was terminated. The tenant, understandably furious at being caught in the middle, moved out without penalty. By the end of the month, my mom was back in her house, our house. I helped her move, carrying boxes through the front door I'd stood at just weeks before, staring down a stranger. The tulip beds were overgrown, but the brass numbers above the door still gleamed. Mom started calling her old friends, inviting them over for coffee like nothing had happened. But I saw the difference in her eyes, a lightness that hadn't been there in that cramped apartment. She looked at me differently too, like she was seeing me for the first time in years, without someone else's lies clouding her view. As I stood in the living room, surrounded by familiar furniture and the faint smell of my mom's lavender candles, I felt a weight lift. This wasn't just about getting the house back. It was about reclaiming trust, about proving to my mom and maybe to myself that I wasn't the person my siblings had painted me to be. The fight wasn't over. The repayments would take time, and the rift with my siblings might never heal. But for now, my mom was home, and that was enough. Standing in my mom's living room, surrounded by the familiar scent of her lavender candles and the creak of the old hardwood floors, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. She was back in her house, our house in suburban Virginia, where the tulip beds were already showing signs of revival. My mom moved through the space with a quiet energy, rearranging photo frames and inviting her old friends over for coffee, their laughter filling the rooms like it used to when I was a kid. The brass numbers above the door gleamed again, no longer mocking me but welcoming her home. It wasn't just about reclaiming a house. It was about restoring her place in the world, her sense of security, and our bond which had been strained by lies and distance. A few weeks later, back in my small Paris apartment, my laptop pinged with a Zoom call. My mom's face filled the screen, sunlight streaming through the big kitchen window behind her. She was smiling, a real smile, not the tired one I'd seen in that cramped studio apartment. Her friends' voices chattered in the background, and for an hour, we talked about everything and nothing: her garden plans, my latest freelance project, the way the Virginia air felt crisp in the mornings. It hit me then. We'd come so close to losing this. Not just the house, but each other. I'd fought for her, maybe harder than I needed to, but it felt right. Did I go too far? Or not far enough? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up for family or fight for what's yours? Drop your story below, hit that like button, and subscribe to join me on this journey. Let's keep telling real stories together.